are waiting, so you can see the podium there. You can see a number of members of the media waiting for Governor Gavin Newsom to speak. Prop 50 would basically allow the state to adopt new maps that have already been drawn. Voters have had a chance to look and see what those look like. They have been drawn with the goal for Democrats of picking up 5 more seats in Congress. This originally started after Texas was the first state to change their maps mid-decade between U.S. Census counts, which is not the normal way that this process works. But basically, once Texas did that, Governor Newsom said, quote, "We have to fight fire with fire," and he launched Prop 50.
So if these newly redrawn districts do bring about 5 more Democrats being represented from California into the Congress, that could possibly negate the 5 Republican seats that the lawmakers of Texas had hoped to pick up. But as a result, now this has triggered some other states looking at gerrymandering, at redrawing their districts as well.
Absolutely. And people across the nation have been watching to see what is happening here in California, wondering what exactly voters would decide. As an example of that, the timing of this news conference right now with the governor is based partly on what's been happening in New York City. Zohran Mamdani, who is projected to win the New York City mayoral race, has been having a news conference. And this is timed so that for any national media, national cable outlets that were airing the comments from New York City, they would be able to then come here to California and hear live from our governor.
Yeah, so we're still waiting for the governor to step up to the mic right there. This is in Sacramento at the Democrats' headquarters, and nothing really surprising about the outcome today. The polls had for days shown that the Yes on 50 vote had strong support here in California, and you can see some of the numbers so far that have been counted, but the yes votes outweighing the no votes so far by a really wide margin.
We should mention that this already appears to be triggering some movements across districts. We have Congressman Ami Bera already announcing tonight that he plans to switch districts when he runs for re-election next year. So in Congress, they run every 2 years. They're kind of always in an election cycle, right, with that kind of turnover.
We can go to Ashley Zavala right now, who's there at the Democratic headquarters right now as we wait for Governor Newsom to take the podium. So again, just like we said earlier, Ashley, no real surprise here, but now it has happened. The voters have said yes on 50. Just what are your thoughts and what happens from here?
Yeah, Golston and Edie, tonight's outcome is really not a surprise given all the polling that we saw leading up to tonight. And right here, we're at the California Democratic Party headquarters waiting for Governor Gavin Newsom to come out on this pretty small patio, which is why you don't see me, because journalists are crouched around this small area. But Governor Newsom's campaign is here. And speaking of tonight's result, I mean, this is the same campaign that basically told small dollar donors to stop donating last week because of this was really the outcome that they were expecting. Again, Proposition 50 asking California voters to essentially toss California's congressional district maps that were drawn by an independent citizen-led redistricting commission here in the state and replace them with a new one that was quickly drawn by Democrats this summer. Those maps, and I will say here at the Democratic Party headquarters all night, Paul Mitchell has been here taking questions from journalists. He noted while that map targets 5 Republicans, about 3 of them are guaranteed. That's Representative Kevin Kiley in our area, Doug LaMalfa's district in Northern California, and Ken Calvert's district down in Southern California. Now, the 2 toss-ups could still be Darrell Issa and David Valadao in the Central Valley. Those are the 2 that are sort of outstanding questions, but really Democrats selling this as a referendum to President Donald Trump. That was the messaging that the Yes on 50 campaign carried really throughout this very quick process. I mean, this was something that was put on the ballot by the California legislature in August, and here we are on November 4th with this outcome. Again, a referendum against President Donald Trump. A lot of questions now for the No on 50 campaign in the California Republican Party with what exactly happened on California Politics 360 over the weekend. We had the No on 50 chair, Jessica Milan Patterson. Essentially, I asked her, did President Donald Trump hamstring this campaign in this effort to fight Proposition 50, given that the president president's approval rating in California is 26%. But overall, as you saw, I know you guys mentioned the Zohran Mamdani result in New York. I mean, a big night for Democrats just across the country we're seeing.
Well, let's talk about that, Ashley, because there has certainly been discussion of what this could mean for Governor Newsom's career moving forward. He has this victory just within a week of telling the nation that he is considering running for president.
Right. In fact, telling at first CBS that he would be lying if he said otherwise, essentially, but still not ready to say whether or not he's running. He's just saying that he'll consider it after the 2026 midterms. Again, tonight really setting up those 2026 midterms with these new maps. And again, just continues this run between California and President Donald Trump, this tension between the two. I mean, even leading up to tonight, I think some of the questions moving forward here is what exactly does President Donald Trump intend to do, as he is saying that Prop 50 is a scam, saying that it's under criminal and legal review. So action is to be seen. But actually, the governor is coming out and stepping to the mic right now with the first partner. So we're going to let him speak here.
Well, good evening, everybody, and let me underscore, it's been a good evening for everybody, not just the Democratic Party, but what a night for the Democratic Party, a party that is in its ascendancy, a party that's on its toes, no longer on its heels, from coast to coast, sea to shining sea. But it was not just a victory tonight for the Democratic Party. It was a victory for the United States of America, for the people of this country and the principles that our founding fathers lived and died for. And so we're proud. We're proud here in California to be part of this narrative this evening. We're proud of the work that the people of the state of California did tonight to send a powerful message to an historic president. Donald Trump is an historic president. He is the most historically unpopular president in modern history. In every critical category, Donald Trump is underwater. He promised to make us healthier. He promised to make us wealthier. We're sicker and poorer. And he fundamentally understands that. Why else would he call Greg Abbott saying he's entitled to 5 seats? Why else is he trying to rig the midterm elections before one single vote is even cast? He understands his position at this moment in the United States of America. One thing he never counted on, though, was the state of California. Instead of agonizing over the state of our nation, we organized in an unprecedented way in a 90-day sprint. People from all over the United States of America contributed their voices and their support for this initiative. We stood tall and we stood firm in response to Donald Trump's recklessness. And tonight, after poking the bear, this bear roared with an unprecedented turnout in a special election with an extraordinary result. None of us, however, are naive. This is a pattern. This is a practice. Donald Trump's efforts to rig the midterm election continue to this day. And I'll reinforce that in just a moment. You're seeing him take action all across this country, not just in Texas. You saw what they were able to do in Missouri, what they did in North Carolina, what they're trying to do in Indiana, and inevitably in Florida. They are not screwing around. In June of this year, we saw 4,000 National Guard federalized in the state of California. We saw 700 active duty Marines not sent overseas, but sent to the second largest city in the United States of America to militarize our streets. We said in June this was a preview of things to come. What more evidence do you need than what happened in Washington, D.C., what's happening up in Portland, cities like Chicago? When we kicked off this campaign just 90 or so days ago in Little Tokyo, in Southern California, in LA, at the Democracy Center, Donald Trump sent Greg Bovino. He sent his private police force that increasingly appears to have taken an oath of office to Donald Trump, not to the Constitution of the United States. He sent them to our kickoff rally to chill free expression, to chill free speech, to intimidate people from participating. Just today, in Los Angeles, Donald Trump called up the Border Patrol, sent them to Dodger Stadium, and threw a fastball at free speech, right at the head, free expression, to suppress the vote in America's second largest city. Just did that today. People in tactical gears sent out to intimidate a community that is already on edge. But you see, as we speak, people are still in line. People waiting up 3 hours to cast their vote, to send a message to Donald Trump. No crowns, no thrones, no kings. That's what this victory represents. It's a victory for the people of the state of California and the United States of America. And this is a victory that's punctuated with a sober reminder that it's not just the actions that Donald Trump has taken to federalize our guard, to begin the process of militarizing American cities, to intimidate free expression and speech by utilizing ICE and Border Patrol in America's cities. But he also announced today, right when polls were opening, that this election was rigged. That this election was rigged. Of course, those are familiar words. It's exactly what Donald Trump said after January 6th, that day of love, where he tried to light democracy on fire. He tried to wreck this country, and he called in to the Secretary of State in Georgia, calling up for 11,000, 12,000 votes, just like he called Greg Abbott, saying he's entitled to those 5 seats. He said this election was rigged, and he's moving to look for criminal prosecution and investigations at the Department of Justice. He is not screwing around. So tonight, I'm proud, but I'm very mindful and sober of the moment we are living in. Donald Trump does not believe in fair and free elections, period and full stop. This is not complicated, and it's self-evident to anyone paying attention. You start to stack up all of these actions that continue to this moment and will continue in moments to come. If you think I'm exaggerating, consider his announcement just a few weeks ago to send rapid response teams all across the United States, in all 50 states, tens of thousands of members of the military prepared for urban deployment. A preview of things to come. But back to this state. Our state of mind was resolute. Our state of mind was resolved to stand firm and to stand tall, to not be intimidated, to not be humiliated, to not fall prey to cynicism, to not fall prey to fear and the anxiety of someone that believes in only one thing, shock and awe, to intimidate and exhaust us. But we're seeing all across this country, 7 million people strong, standing up, not just for themselves, but for each other and for these enduring and historic principles of our founding fathers. And I'll end on that. Next year is the 250th anniversary of the best of Roman Republic, the best of Greek democracy. This fundamental notion of a system of checks and balances, of popular sovereignty, the rule of law. Mr. President, the rule of law, not the rule of dawn. And I hope it's dawning on people. The sobriety of this moment, what's at stake. Tonight, as I said, is an extraordinary moment for our party, but again, it's an extraordinary moment affirming those principles. Our founding fathers did not live and die to see the kind of vandalism, to this republic and our democracy that Donald Trump is trying to perpetuate. And so my call tonight, in the spirit of Whitman, who talked about the powerful play, goes on. We all must contribute a verse. And so we need the state of Virginia. We need the state of Maryland. We need our friends in New York, in Illinois, in Colorado. We need to see other states with their remarkable leaders that have been doing remarkable things meet this moment head on as well, to recognize what we're up against in 2026. And let me make this crystal clear. We can de facto end Donald Trump's presidency as we know it the minute Speaker Jeffries gets sworn in as Speaker of the House of Representatives. It is all on the line, a bright line in 2026. And so I want to thank everybody that stood up, not just for our democracy, but stood up for those that have feel bullied and intimidated, stood up for this notion of co-equal branches of government and a system of checks and balances. And I want to thank my wife, who reminds me every single day that this is about those that feel alone, those that feel isolated, those that feel an anxiety and a stress that they never could have imagined in their lives. This was about saying to them, we have your back, we see you, you matter, we care. And I'll just say this, I'm confident as we move forward into 2026 in this country, the best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
All right, not taking any questions from reporters there. A governor having some very strong words to say about President Donald Trump, saying that he's a historic president, historically unpopular.
It's continuing the theme that we have heard throughout this short campaign.
Yes.
He talked about it being a 90-day sprint. It's been 90 days of putting President Trump right in the spotlight and making it really a referendum on the president. And so maybe not a surprise to hear this victory speech tonight continuing those same themes and really ending with the call to action for other blue states to follow California's lead and to draw up their own maps that would put more Democrats in Congress and, again, control of Congress on the line in 2026. That's what all of this is about.
All right, we have team coverage coming up later tonight. Again, the Prop 50 passing here in the state of California. We'll continue to monitor the results as they come in. And we also have results of other races. Our next newscast coming up at 10 p.m. here on KQCA. Of course, we'll have more coverage as well on KCRA 3 at 11 o'clock.
We now rejoin regular programming.
Thank you.